When I was a kid, I thought my uncle was cool. He gave me my first watch and called me champ. At my wedding, he didn't even show up, just sent a text, busy with real family. 6 years later, he applied for a job at my company. The moment I saw his name, I scheduled the interview myself only to make him realize his mistake. I, 32M, still remember the weight of that watch on my wrist. I was 8 years old, and my uncle had driven up in his sleek black sedan, the kind that made heads turn in our modest neighborhood. He'd ruffled my hair, called me champ, and fastened the watch around my skinny wrist himself. It was oversized, clunky, probably cost more than my dad made in a month. I wore it everywhere, even to bed, until the battery died 2 years later. I kept it in my drawer for years after that, a talisman of the person I thought cared about me. My uncle wasn't just cool, he was everything I wanted to be. Successful, confident, always impeccably dressed. He worked in finance, made good money, drove nice cars. When he visited, which wasn't often, he'd take me out for ice cream and tell me stories about the corporate world, about deals and handshakes in corner offices. My dad, his younger brother, worked construction. Good, honest work, but it left him exhausted and underpaid. My uncle represented a different life, one I dreamed about reaching someday. The visits became less frequent as I got older. By the time I was in high school, I'd see him maybe once a year, usually at Christmas. He'd show up with expensive gifts, stay for an hour, and leave. My parents never said much about it, but I could see the disappointment in my dad's eyes every time his brother made an excuse to cut the visit short. Still, I idolized him. I studied hard, got into a decent college, majored in business administration. In the back of my mind, I wanted to prove to him that I could make it too. College was rough. Money was tight, and I worked 2 part-time jobs while juggling classes. My parents helped where they could, but there wasn't much to spare. I thought about reaching out to my uncle a few times, maybe asking for advice or help with an internship, but I never did. Some part of me wanted to earn his respect without asking for handouts. I graduated with decent grades and landed an entry-level position at a mid-sized tech company. Nothing glamorous, but it was a start. The years blurred together. Promotions, late nights, networking events. I worked my way up slowly but steadily. By the time I was 26, I'd met her. My future wife. She was brilliant, funny, grounded. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Planning the wedding became the focus of our lives for months. We kept it relatively small, around 100 guests, mostly family and close friends. I sent my uncle an invitation months in advance, called him twice to make sure he got it. He assured me he'd be there, said he wouldn't miss it for the world. I actually believed him. The wedding day arrived. It was perfect, warm June weather, a garden venue, everything we'd hoped for. I stood at the altar, scanning the crowd as guests filed in. My dad sat in the front row, tears already forming in his eyes. My mom kept dabbing at hers with a tissue, but my uncle's seat remained empty. I told myself he was running late, that he'd slip in during the ceremony. He didn't. After the ceremony, during the reception, I checked my phone. There it was, a text message sent 20 minutes before I'd walked down the aisle. Just a simple line, busy with real family. Congrats. No apology, no explanation beyond those 6 words. Busy with real family. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there in my tuxedo, surrounded by people celebrating the happiest day of my life, and felt something inside me crack. My wife noticed immediately, asked what was wrong. I showed her the message. She held my hand and told me it was his loss, that we didn't need people like that in our lives. She was right, but it didn't stop the hurt. I tried to move past it. Life went on. Honeymoon, settling into married life, climbing the corporate ladder. 3 years after the wedding, an opportunity opened up at a startup. They needed someone to head their operations division. It was a risk, but I took it. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Within 2 years, we'd expanded from 30 employees to over 200. I became VP of operations, then COO. By the time I turned 32, the founder was ready to step back, and the board offered me the CEO position. I accepted. Running a company consumed every waking hour. We were in the tech sector, developing software solutions for mid-sized businesses. The work was challenging but rewarding. I built a good team, fostered a culture of respect and hard work. My wife and I had bought a house, started talking about kids. My parents were proud. My dad would sometimes look at me with this expression of quiet amazement. like he couldn't quite believe his son had made it this far. I wished I could say the same about my uncle, but he'd never reached out after that text. Not once in 6 years. Then one morning, my HR director knocked on my office door. She had a stack of resumes in her hand. We were hiring for a senior management position in our finance department. She wanted my input on the final candidates. I was barely paying attention as she walked me through the first few applications, my mind already on the quarterly projections I needed to review. Then she laid down the fifth resume, and I stopped breathing. There it was. My uncle's name, printed in professional font at the top of the page. His experience, his credentials, his contact information. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. He'd left his previous company 8 months ago, according to the dates. The gap in employment was notable. My HR director was explaining something about his qualifications, how impressive his background was, how he'd be perfect for the role. I barely heard her. I asked her to schedule him for an interview. She seemed pleased, mentioned that she'd flagged him as a strong candidate. I told her I wanted to conduct the interview personally. She looked surprised. I rarely involved myself in hiring at this level, but agreed. We set it for the following week, Tuesday afternoon. I had 7 days to decide exactly how this would play out. My wife noticed my mood shift that evening. I was quieter than usual, distracted. Over dinner, I told her about the resume. Her expression hardened immediately. She asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet. She reminded me that I didn't owe him anything, that revenge wouldn't fix what he'd done. I knew she was right, but I couldn't shake the image of that text message, those words that had defined his relationship with me. Busy with real family. The week passed slowly. I reviewed his resume a dozen times, memorizing every detail. His career had been successful, but not spectacular. He'd bounced between a few firms, each position lateral rather than upward. The 8-month gap suggested he hadn't left his last job voluntarily. I made some discreet calls to contacts in the industry. The picture that emerged wasn't flattering. He'd been let go due to restructuring, had been searching for something comparable ever since. His age was working against him, 56 in a field that often favored younger candidates. He needed this job. Tuesday arrived. I dressed carefully that morning, chose my best suit, the one I wore for board meetings. My wife kissed me goodbye and told me to do what felt right. I wasn't sure what that was yet. At the office, I cleared my afternoon schedule. My assistant set up the conference room, brought water, made sure everything looked professional. I reviewed his resume one final time, then walked to the conference room 10 minutes early to wait. He arrived exactly on time. I watched through the glass wall as my assistant greeted him, took his coat, offered him coffee. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, the confidence I'd once admired now seeming more like desperation barely concealed. He carried a leather portfolio, his movements careful and measured. My assistant led him to the conference room and opened the door. The moment he saw me, his face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion first, as he tried to place me. Then recognition, followed immediately by a flash of something that might have been fear. He recovered quickly, pasted on a professional smile, extended his hand. I stood and shook it, gestured for him to sit. His palm was sweaty. I let the silence stretch for a moment, watching him squirm. Then I introduced myself formally, as if we were strangers, and thanked him for coming in. He played along, nodded, said he was excited about the opportunity. His voice had that same smooth quality I remembered from childhood, but now I could hear the desperation underneath it. I asked him to walk me through his resume, to tell me about his most recent position and why he'd left. He launched into a rehearsed explanation about mutual parting of ways, about seeking new challenges, about how impressed he was with our company's growth. I listened without interrupting, making notes on the pad in front of me. When he finished, I asked about the 8-month gap. He stumbled slightly, said the market had been challenging, that he'd been selective about opportunities. I nodded, wrote something down, let another silence build. Then I asked him about family, whether he had support at home, whether he had people depending on him. He seemed thrown by the personal question, but answered that yes. He had a wife and 2 adult children. I asked if he was close with his extended family, his siblings. He said he was, that family was important to him. The lie came so easily that I almost admired it. I closed his resume and looked directly at him. Asked if there was anything else he thought I should know about him, any relevant experience or personal qualities that might make him right for this position. He launched into another prepared speech about leadership and team building. I let him finish, then sat back in my chair. I told him his credentials were impressive, that on paper, he looked like an excellent candidate. His face brightened immediately, relief flooding his features. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside was that old watch, the one he'd given me 24 years ago. I set it on the table between us. His eyes went to the watch, then back to my face. The color drained from his cheeks. I explained, in a calm, professional voice, that I had a policy at my company. We valued loyalty, respect, and the understanding that family, real family, meant showing up when it mattered. I mentioned that I'd gotten married 6 years ago, that it had been an important day, that certain people's absence had been noted. He started to speak, to explain or apologize, but I held up my hand. I told him I appreciated him taking the time to come in, that we'd be in touch about the position. My tone made it clear the interview was over. He sat there for a moment, frozen, then slowly stood. He looked at the watch, then at me, asked if he could explain, if we could talk. I said there was nothing to talk about, that I had other interviews scheduled. My assistant appeared at the door as if summoned, ready to show him out. He picked up his portfolio with shaking hands. Before he left, he turned back, his voice breaking slightly. He said he was sorry, that he'd made mistakes, that he hoped I could understand he'd been dealing with his own family issues at the time. I told him I understood perfectly. He'd been busy with real family. The reference to his own text message landed like I'd intended. His face crumpled, aged 10 years in an instant. He left without another word. I sat alone in the conference room for a long time after he'd gone. The watch sat on the table, catching the afternoon light. I'd thought this moment would feel triumphant, that seeing his face when he realized who I'd become would somehow heal that old wound. Instead, I just felt tired. My wife had been right. Revenge didn't fix anything. But neither did it feel wrong. I'd simply held up a mirror, shown him the consequences of his choices. My HR director came by an hour later to ask how the interview had gone. I told her he wasn't the right fit for our company culture, that we should move forward with other candidates. She accepted this without question and moved on to discuss the next resume. The decision took 30 seconds to record in our system. His application was marked as declined, filed away, forgotten. That evening, my dad called. It was unusual for him to call midweek. We typically talked on Sundays. He asked if I'd heard from my uncle, said he'd gotten a strange phone call from him earlier that day. Apparently, my uncle had reached out after years of silence, asking about me, about my company. He'd seemed upset, my dad said, kept apologizing for things that didn't make sense. My dad wanted to know if something had happened. I told him about the interview. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad sighed, a sound heavy with years of accumulated disappointment. He said his brother had always been like that, choosing what was convenient over what was right. He asked if I felt better now. I said I didn't know. He told me he was proud of me, not for the revenge, but for building something meaningful, for being the kind of man who showed up when it mattered. That was when I finally felt something shift, not triumph, but a quiet sense of closure. The watch went back in my drawer, where it had lived for so many years. I never heard from my uncle again. No apology, no attempt to explain or reconcile. Maybe he understood that some bridges, once burned, stay burned. Or maybe he simply moved on to the next opportunity, the next disappointment. I didn't spend much time wondering about it. A month later, my wife told me she was pregnant. We'd been trying for a while, had almost given up hope. The news reset everything, put it all in perspective. As I held her, feeling the weight of impending fatherhood settle on my shoulders, I thought about the kind of father I wanted to be. The kind of uncle I'd be to my siblings' future kids. I thought about showing up, about meaning it when you call someone champ, about being there for the moments that matter. I've never regretted turning him down for that job. Some people earn second chances. Some people show up, put in the work, prove they've changed. My uncle never did any of those things. He wanted the reward without the relationship, the position without the presence. In the end, I'd given him exactly what he'd given me. A moment of recognition followed by absence, a door closed professionally and permanently. The company continues to grow. My son was born 7 months after that interview, healthy and loud and perfect. My dad retired from construction and now spends his time helping us with the baby. My uncle's name occasionally comes up in family conversations, usually followed by uncomfortable silence. No one asks me to reconcile with him. They understand some wounds don't heal just because time passes. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about that watch, about the kid he called champ, about the wedding invitation he ignored. I wonder if he connects those moments to the interview, to the rejection, to the consequences finally catching up. But mostly, I don't wonder at all. I'm too busy showing up for the people who showed up for me, building real family with the people who understand what that actually means. That's the best revenge, I think. Becoming someone he could never be, not because of money or success, but because I learned the lesson he never did. You show up. You mean it when you call someone family. And when they need you, you're there. Everything else is just words.